Hey, gamers, quick ad break. As you probably know by now, the Beyond Solitaire podcast is proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. And that is a project that I'm super excited about because I believe that learning through play is the best way to do it. And the CLGS is making it happen in college classrooms and hopefully high school ones. Part of that initiative is Games Press. If you want to back their first successful Kickstarter project, pre-orders for Monumental Consequence by Dr. Mary Beth Looney are open now, and keep an eye out for Rising Waters, designed by Dr. Scout Bloom. This is an upcoming game about the Mississippi flood of 1927, one of the worst natural disasters in American history, and I will be interviewing Dr. Bloom about it on this podcast in the coming weeks. Thanks so much, and let's get started with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here in the pod with a very special guest, Kathryn Hymes. She is one half of Thorny Games. How you doing, Kathryn?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Liz.
Oh, it's super great to have you on. So why don't you give us just a basic rundown of Thorny Games and what y'all do?
Yeah, so Thorny Games is a game studio that I help run with my partner, Hakan Selola, and we make storytelling games. And the special twist, I think, on a lot of the games that we have is that they're games about language. They use language to offer a different lens on how to say interesting things about people, their relationship to their own identities, to each other, to the broader culture. There's so much good stuff you can dig around in with language. So we love story games. Indie RPG is usually the scene that we find ourselves in, but separate from that, we're big board gamers, digital gamers, all of that. LARPers, I have to say LARPers. That's very important because we are prize LARPers as well.
I'm 100% in favor of that. So did you have an interest in language and then in gaming, or did these things sort of co-develop for you?
Yeah, it definitely, I'd say I'm personally just a playful person. I've always been playful, and like, you know, what a game is formally or not, it's just, I'm someone that hopefully doesn't take myself too seriously, and would always kind of look for the play in stuff that I do. But my interest in language goes way back as well. I loved tinkering with languages as a kid, and I'm guessing that might be similar to your background based on some of the things we talked about before this recording started. But I could just lose myself in grammars. I remember I'd asked for like a Danish grammar and like an Amharic grammar when I was young, and eventually that led to studying linguistics and then needing to find a way to make a career in the world. And so I became a computational linguist, so someone who does language, but also enough computer science that you can kind of overlap the two and build stuff so that computers can do interesting things with human language. So that started first. And then my world as a gamer developed just as gaming became, an all-consuming hobby. And so naturally, the two had to collide at some point.
I feel that. Actually, I'm also super interested in the fact that you are into computers and language. I know that Hakan is a cryptographer. Is that correct? Did I read that right?
Yeah, by training, yes.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. So I approach languages as sort of a tool to get history out, if that makes sense. But when you see, I think, language as code or as something to crack, how does that impact your language learning? Do you spend a lot of time with specific languages? Do you like to check out different languages and just kind of poke at how they work? How does study of a language go when you're looking at it from that perspective?
It's interesting. Yeah, I'd say, I have two different answers for this, because there's the perspective of what is like the computational study of language, and right. in that world, you are often asking questions that are less about like the human process of understanding or producing language, but more how you can replicate that in a way that is computationally feasible. How can we make it so that computers can do what we do effortlessly? And it turns out that what we do is really sophisticated, and it's really hard to do. Though computers are getting much better at it, generating speech, understanding it, navigating it. all happening now. But I think that there's also another interesting sort of history bit when it comes to, let's say, machine translation in general, where like that, we're all used to using Google Translate or something like it. And, you know, you click a button, you get from English to Russian. But some of the earliest, let's say, conceptions or motivations and in thinking about that problem were actually to think about it like it was some kind of code. Like how would you approach the problem differently, knowing full well that English and Russian are separate languages that have their own histories. But if you pretended that English, say, were just a mangled version of Russian, what sources or tooling could you use from, say, cryptography or signal processing or statistics or something like it to try and get out meaning? You know, the field left that model pretty quickly, but it was a sort of a motivating question kind of back in the day when that was a very salient concern for people. But when it comes to my own language learning, there is sort of this joy of understanding. And I think that like you can find that same joy in cracking a code. But for me, it's this mental puzzle of being able to put together a grammar and enough tools that I can feel functional and like creep into different kinds of conversation. And it may start off with me just like, oh, I'm gonna like try and put a little playful toy picture in my own head of what Italian looks like. And then maybe challenge myself to try and read something in Hungarian. But you know, that only gets you so far. And I've done that, especially as a linguist, you end up playing a lot with little models of language, but it's such a different thing when you try to like deeply gain fluency in something. I've had to do a lot of reflection on like just the manpower and hours it takes to truly like immerse yourself as an adult to fight for that second language fluency. And ultimately, I believe you really just need to be surrounded by it. Yeah, but when you get there, it's so great.
That is super interesting. It's super interesting to hear this from you too, because so I don't work for them anymore, but I spent a lot of time freelancing for the Coptic Scriptorium project, where I spent a lot of my time teaching a computer basically how to read Coptic good. So, you know, you parse parts of words, you give them grammatical labels. I spent a bunch of time like drawing arrows between parts of sentences that were supposed to like work together. And it was so interesting to watch the parser get smarter the more input it had. Like it still couldn't replace a human reader, but it was like the more input it got, the better it got at recognizing patterns and like catching things that it had not caught before. It was a super fascinating thing. That said, I always warn my students, like, do not use Google Translate for Latin. One, I will catch you because it will come off wrong. And two, it's an ethical problem. But yeah, it's really interesting how much I mean, computers are amazing and they're still not us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that actually there's a deeper philosophical question there too, just about language as a tool, where, you know, as computers become more fluent in being able to use it, and you know, maybe there will be a day, who knows how soon or how far it'll be, when you know, it won't be possible to know whether or not Google Translate was involved in the Latin translation or whatever it may be, just because it's that good. And there really are some amazing models out there that are generating language that feel, you know, impressively human. And it makes me think about just whether or not there's going to be this kind of crisis of self or identity around what it means to be language speaking beings. And when we have so much of our own culture and again, identity markers that are reflected in our language, when maybe a lot of our actual speaking is done with non-humans, how that'll net out. Or maybe everyone will be fine and we'll have other things to worry about. But that's my shower thoughts, kind of, you know, rumination.
It's like the true future of those comedy writings that are like, I ran all the Olive Garden commercials through a bot and this is what came out.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm really fascinated too by how you can express linguistic concepts through games. So Thorny Games has come up with 3 very different approaches to language through gaming, from what I understand. Do you want to go over the 3 games that y'all have made and like what they were trying to communicate in short?
Yeah. Definitely. I should say that there are more games that we have, but these are, let's say, the three big releases that we have. Yeah. So we have a game called Dialect, and Dialect is a game about telling the story of an isolated community through its beginning, rise, and fall in some sense, or the end of its isolation. And you do so by building up dialects that's particular to the people that you're creating. And what is interesting is that the language that you end up creating at the table with others becomes this reflection of who the people that you're playing are, what happens to them, and how they change as the community changes. And then the language also becomes a little kind of trinket and takeaway that are something that you share just with the people that you've co-created it with. And so that's a game that's kind of really exploring a couple of ideas in language. The whole thing is somewhat of a love letter to sociolinguistics, in the sense of like exploring the idea of language as a reflection of identity and community, and your use of it reflecting on you, and the words that are particular to a particular group of people that share some common circumstances in space and language history. And then it also is talking about the way that language can change. So one of the things that it does is it uses this card-based mechanism to have people think about the ways that words truly do often change in terms of the big trends, the idea of meanings becoming more specific, or more generalized, or other examples that you can find. These are card-based prompts that people can experience and that gain deeper meaning when you play it, especially if you created the original word. You see how it becomes something new. And then it also is a way to talk about, let's say, language endangerment and just language death, which is a thing that is happening on a whole new scale now in the world, and is a consequence of many things: globalization, power structures, what have you, so much. But what it means is just that the world is becoming less diverse linguistically. And that is a huge loss in terms of, what are, something that's deeply important for human culture. And that, I think, is something that the game in and of itself is almost an accompaniment to different kinds of commissioned work that it comes with. We have a set of backdrops that the game is shipped with, which are settings written by other people to help explore maybe their own point of view on language in a particular kind of community, but also a chapter about language revitalization, written by a linguist and activist who has been deep in his career thinking about how to help languages be more sustaining. So that's one of them. That's dialects.
We can do an episode about each of these, but keep going.
Then there's a game called Sign, and Sign is about, or it's inspired by a story that is a true one, which is the history behind Nicaraguan Sign Language. Nicaraguan Sign Language is a language that was created by deaf children in Nicaragua in the 70s and 80s, and is a living language today. And that is a great example of, one, a language born in modern times, which is a fascinating thing, but also just a language that was born from children who eventually it sort of made its way to becoming the nationally recognized sign language within the country. And there is a lot of amazing things to think about just that history, that story, and what it means, and how that seed of language creation and the need to communicate is in each of us, and also just particular to the people that created that language. So Sign is a live action game that helps to, let's say, or is in part inspired by that story, and that has really led us to do a lot lot of interesting, let's say, research and collaboration on our own when it comes to thinking about Nicaraguan Sign Language specifically. We've worked with a charity that's focused on promoting sign language in Nicaragua. And my partner, Hakan, has had the experience of being able to go with them into the field a few times. And so part of that game is that it's physical proceeds that we get from selling the physical game are donated to this charity and to support sign language education in Nicaragua. So that is Sign. And then the third game is called Xeno Language, which is inspired by what we call the soulful sci-fi genre, but primarily amazing media like Story of Your Life, which is a short story that the movie Arrival was based on, and also, let's say, older book and movie combo Contact, but this idea of thinking deeply about our relationship to life beyond us, and especially how that may be reflected in language. So this is a game where you play as one of a group of scientists who are called to make contact and communicate with alien visitors. And as you begin to try and make sense of a message, you begin to see your own life and relationships differently. And so it's a great game for us, where we've gotten to explore lots of fun and different language mechanics for thinking about how to represent language, especially this alien language. And the way that is manifested in the game is we have a custom built channeling board. Maybe people are more familiar with Ouija as a term, but it is a channeling board where people collectively touch and let a planchette-like lens travel over alien symbols that then they are left to think about. And I think that there's a couple interesting linguistic concepts there. One around just meaning and how we derive meaning from different kinds of symbols and different kinds of meaning that we can ascribe to different things. And then also just translation and what translation means and what is found and lost, I guess, in translation. So those are the three.
Oh my gosh, she's also amazing. So I think my primary question as I was looking over all of these is, how do you balance? Languages are very complex. There's a lot to talk about if you're talking about a language. I've been studying Latin for more than half my life now. I still suck at Latin sometimes. And so how do you combine, I guess, the complexities of language with the simplicity that you need to make a game that anybody is able to pick up and play? Like, how do you decide what goes in? How do you kind of simplify aspects of language so that players who maybe have no idea what's going on, especially if you're working with something that is essentially simulating an alien language experience, how do you do that without overdoing it?
It's a great question. And in one, like, I'd say, so all these games are meant to be, they're entirely meant for people who want to have fun. And they're fun games. They stand on their own. They're meant to be experiences that you seek out because you're looking for, an experience that you would get from a game, which is a different type of experience. But it's not an exercise in education, and that is a great thing to do. Like, there are many fine educational games, but these games have been used in the classroom. But their main purpose is to be deeply generative of story. And the thing is that language is that way too. Language is deeply generative story. And so one of the ways that we kind of hold ourselves to the right degree of complexity and simplicity is that we design all of our games to be language independent to some sense, in the sense that with a couple of exceptions that are easily chopped off, say, from the rules or separated. You can, and people regularly do, play all of these games in whatever language is most natural to them. And all you need is to translate the rules, or to have someone who can, translate the materials to be able to have the same full experience. And that's because these games are exploring, or they're designed to help explore some of these broader concepts that are true of many languages, about the way that identity is reflected in language and how languages change over time, and some of the shared components that people can build on without becoming overly technical. And I think that sometimes it's amazing to look underneath and marvel at how technical language is, and how technically accomplished we are to be able to do it. I think it's like you take a phonetics class or a phonology class. To me, that always does it even more than grammar, because like you can kind of write grammar down and get rules for it, and I think people are used to that. But when you actually realize all of this computation that a brain is doing constantly as a speaker in a dialect, or in whatever is the speech that you're presenting at any point in time, you are doing so many minute things that you are unaware of. And it's amazing to get to let's say marvel at that detail, but also not to get lost in it, and to realize that there are these broader concepts that are true about language that you can still marvel and think at. And so we try and hold ourselves to that higher level, and oftentimes I think that higher level has a lot of overlap with just storytelling. And the idea of language as being this reflection of people changing, as people change, culture changes, so too does the language. It's a give and take, and you see that in the way that the stories play out, especially in a game like Dialect.
Ooh, that's really interesting. I have so many questions I could ask about this, but I think I'm going to take it to you. So we're talking about, storytelling and language change and culture. Although these are language independent games that really anyone could play, a lot of them, especially I would say Sign and Dialect, seem to have their roots in real cultural situations and issues. And I know that language, I think it's a very personal thing for a lot of people, especially a language that is dying and that people are trying to save. So how are you, I guess, sensitive to the cultural realities of what language can do and mean for people, while also communicating as naturally as possible, what a culture shift in the language would feel like to people who don't necessarily think about it?
Yeah, this is an important question, and one that we've tried to spend a lot of time on. I mean, one of the things that we do in Dialect is talk about it. Like, the game is meant to be a way to bring attention in part to the fact that this is something that happens in the world and that a lot of people aren't aware of. There's there's bringing attention to it. There's also making sure that the right people's voices are also represented in the game itself. So we write backdrops that come from us as a game studio that are meant to illustrate the process of language change, which is something that happens all the time in many different contexts and isn't just about, let's say, language death. But we write at least the core backdrops to be more about this kind of language change. So we offer one where people will play out the history of a Martian outpost and what that means, developing a dialect on Mars, or developing a thieves' cant, your thieves that are working together and like have a secret language, or you're a set of, let's say, like Wall-E-like machines that are, fulfilling their last mission on Earth, but as they've been left. But there are like real perspectives in the world that we wanted to make sure were at least represented in just the way that these backdrops could look to people. And so we commissioned different people to actually write their own, and there's a lot that's available, and they aren't just around. They're varied. They come from people with different language backgrounds. We have some great work by, so many activists, linguists, and game designers that are a part of it. I think what comes with maybe 12 extra backdrops, and And, I think even just the act of reading these can give people different perspective. They're designed to at least be written from the point of view of, a particular person who is representing a particular language community in some sense, or, is offering their perspective there. But it's just a different perspective that isn't ours, which we felt like was both an important point to make for the subject, but also more broadly, something that would make for a better experience holistically, just with the game itself. And then also the game comes with, like we said, sort of an actual chapter and material by an active linguist who is thinking about language revitalization, doing more than just thinking about it, but like living it, doing projects, actually has sort of calls to action about what that means. And I would hope that, there are so many hard questions in trying to represent, a game that is thinking about topics that on one hand are sort of like, language change happens all the time, and I don't speak the same way with my high school friends that I did then. But on the other hand, is actual, terms of, language diversity that is waning in the world. And so I think that, as a product, it at least is trying to navigate those two things in a way that is elevating voices of different people who can represent themselves certainly better than we would ever be able to.
Nice. And I also think about this, I guess, as a language teacher, I try not to force output of language from my students before they're ready, because I'm trying not to stress them out. I want them to interact with Latin because they feel like it's a language that they know, that they have some ownership of. How do you, I guess, encourage participation and communication from players who might be a little bit shy or reticent in these games? That's something I always wonder about, especially with tabletop role-playing games. I mean, I know they're somewhat self-selecting, right? But anybody, would hopefully be able to enjoy them. But you can't just sit there and like let the action flow by. You have to interact. So how do you kind of coax that from players as best you can?
Yeah. Couple things. One is, I think like we spent a lot of time just in the presentation of the book to try and make it a real experience that you could do as your first RPG. And for a lot of people that actually have played it, it's an amazing thing to see that. And I think that part of it is that it's about, as we've heard from fans and players, like if you're drawn in by the subject material of language, and this is sort of the push to finally get you to try a storytelling type game, and this becomes your first experience in, all of the joys and awkwardness of improv and doing that kind of creation on the spot as an adult. So the book comes with just really some mottos to think about that are meant to facilitate people gaining some self-confidence in their ideas, making space for each other, and realizing that fundamentally, like, this is collaborative storytelling. So you need and want everyone at the table to participate in order for it to be the experience that it's intended, the experience you signed up for. The game also very explicitly has a facilitator, which is interesting because it's a GM-less game. But we did this intentionally, and I think that we do it with all of our games have a facilitator, even though they're all GM-less, in the sense that, well, Sign is a little different anyway, but we like GM-less games, I should say, but all of them will have facilitators, because when you have someone that you've named to a special role to help host the game, then you can encourage them to think about what are things they can do to make space for people who are new at this, are trying to find their footing, and inevitably they'll be amazing at it. It's just that you really need to kind of call and kind of give someone the title so that they feel the responsibility and just the power to realize that they are going to be the host for this gathering. And so it's up to them to make sure that other people are welcome. The other thing I will say too is just that some of our games very explicitly mechanize the use of certain particular kinds of words as a way to practice and really just like breathe life into words within contexts. So in dialect, when you create a new word, say, or a new piece of language, part of the turn structure is then to see that played out in a scene. And it's an utterly necessary part because it actually makes the language feel real and lived in, and then it will come up again and again on its own, even if we're even unprompted, right? Even though that isn't mechanized, but it happens consistently.
Are these games meant to be played once or multiple times?
Yeah, multiple times. They're replayable. Certainly, like Sign has, I mean, they're different in that Sign is one where you are playing through a similar scenario each time, but in dialect, there you have wildly different scenarios that are, provided in the book. The book also comes with a scenario writing chapter, so it can help people write their own. We've heard of so many awesome ones. I think my favorites are, like, the book actually has been translated now, or the game has been translated in a handful of languages, and it's so cool to see sort of like the fan backdrops that are being written by let's say a gaming community out of Korea or Italy that have their own take on what they feel like is an interesting isolation to draw from. So yeah, they're all one shots though, I should say, in that it's designed to be played in a single session. Different people have different styles and how they like to play one shots. Sometimes I have like 2 good hours of storytelling in me and then I'm done. And so I break out a lot of one shots into multiple sessions these days.
That makes sense. So I'm assuming you've played your own games a lot. What was the most, give me one or more if you've got more, really memorable moment when playing or testing your game that really brought it to life?
This is a hard question. I don't know if I actually have a good answer for you. I have played them and seen them played so many different times, but I have so much the brain on at that time of being a designer that it can be really difficult to actually to separate it. And more than anything, actually, some of the best things are play reports that come past me. Because then at least like I wasn't there, it happened, and then I can just kind of get the fruits of it. But I don't actually have a pithy single answer for that.
No, so you get to make all the magic and you don't get to fully.
I think that's the curse of making things, is just that you don't actually get to enjoy any of what, like, it's like dialect, or like some of these games are sort of like, oh, okay, I mean, I would have loved, I can never have the same relationship to these games as a player. I think that that's true of anyone that like that makes something, it's like you just can't enjoy it the same way. Or I shouldn't speak for everyone. I certainly can't enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I've never met an author who like reads their own books for fun or anything like that.
Yeah.
So you've chosen a couple of different things to express about language through games so far. Do you have any upcoming concepts that you would really like to encapsulate in a game? And are there any that you think might be so challenging that you're not sure that you could do it?
Oh, awesome question. Yeah. I've been thinking about this. So we worked on I'm really interested, a couple of things that come to mind. Separate from any of the games we've talked about, I'm really interested in games as a format to rethink how you do lots of kind of coordination for people, because really like a game is a rule system that allows people to like take concerted actions together, collaboration, and scale that. And we had a really amazing collaboration that lasted for more than a year with a set of universities and support groups and game designers that were all designing games specifically for and with people with aphasia. Aphasia is language loss, usually due to some kind of brain injury, often stroke. And it's very difficult to get adequate care after when aphasia becomes a chronic condition, and many people with aphasia report this. And so there was an initiative that was started and later funded by an academic grant to see about making games together with again, people with aphasia and support groups, speech language pathologists, and real game designers, to see if you can kind of mechanize some of the basic principles of speech therapy so that people can do, let's say, their own kinds of gameful or playful therapy without the need of a clinician to be present. So at home, like within the situation that they live in. And we made some games collectively together, and later also published an academic article about the co-design process. Some of these games are now being actively played in aphasia support groups. And it was an amazing experience all around, for this kind of collaboration to work. And I would love the idea of thinking about how to, like how something like that can be continued. Like, what are the next steps in terms of, let's say, playful medicine when it comes to speech language therapy? To really become, to walk the path of a, let's say, medical tool. Like you're talking about clinical trials at that point to see whether or not this gameful intervention is something that is actually causing measurable impact for people, or what you can measure from people who are playing these things. But I think that just that concept of playful base here with the like a language community that has a need and also has a seat at the table designing it, and then active therapists and scientists who are thinking about how to best treat this condition, all coming together to make something, is really powerful. Love to see that kind of repeated in different ways, and to think about what that could look like for other kinds of maybe speech disorders or again, language communities or needs. So there's that. That might also be the same answer to the like what's impossible though. I don't know. So but in general, I'd be really curious to make more games about like just exploring the idea of machine language and like machines actively becoming competent language speakers, and so much so that like within our lifetimes, I'm certain that we'll probably be talking to things and not be able to judge their humanity based on their ability to speak. Or to produce language, and so having fluent conversations with machines, what that looks like and how that changes us, it's going to be fascinating.
Am I looking forward to or dreading the day when the phone bot, when I call customer service, can actually?
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be good and bad, like everything.
Has some of your work ever made you nervous? I mean, you are kind of on that edge of, when you're looking at, it's not just computational linguistics at this point, but also maybe kind of pushing into AI and, sentience in a machine in some way, right? Because we understand language, I think, is like the ultimate sign of really like being conscious and being aware. Have you ever kind of freaked yourself out with the work that you're doing, or do you trust in our technological future?
I'm regularly, let's say, I have like a whole suite of emotions, not so much in like the games work that I do, but yes, just in seeing like the way that like that technology is progressing, robotics, things like it. Yeah, like so every day there is like I am in awe and in crisis constantly around some of those feelings. And then other times I'm just living my life, so, but you get a glimpse of certain things, and sometimes you're like pulled into the abyss, and other times you're like, oh, what amazing things humans are.
So this actually leads me to one other question. So my students, I think, would love it if Google Translate were better. But it also kind of leads to the question of, if computers were able to solve all of our translation problems, what value would there be to learning language? And I have my own answer to this, but I want yours.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, like one of the things I would even like pull on even now is that there's such popularity in people learning languages, even just in this moment and over the pandemic. And I mean, you can argue really that it's already at a point where people can use Google Translate to like make their way into the world to do so many things. And yet like language learning is something that people actively want to do, and young people. I know a ton of people, like, Duolingo is a huge, powerful, like, force in language learning. And, people can have their own feelings about like, what is the best way to learn a language, but like there's interest and active interest right now by so many people. So I feel like it I think in the same way that, you can get a player piano to play Chopin or something, but like no one's, but like people are musicians, and we want to talk to humans, see them do it. We want to experience language and culture. I think we intuitively see that there's like a deep part of understanding about, what it means to come from a different place in the world and a perspective and a cultural tradition that is reflected by learning a language deeply. It's like a basic desire that I think a lot of us have, or all of us, to some degree, maybe all of us have. So
nice. All right.
What's yours? I want to hear your answer.
So for me, I think partially, I feel like a different person when I'm working in different languages, if that makes sense. Like the way that you can express thoughts by actually understanding a language as opposed to just translating it into the only one you know. I think it changes how literature feels. I'd read the Iliad in English many times before I learned how to read Attic Greek, but probably the closest thing to an actual religious experience was reading it in Greek, because I was able to understand why it was so beautiful as opposed to just picking up the content. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
One of the things I actually like, it's one of my hobby parts. I hate being called a content creator because I don't think that language exists to fill space. It exists to make meaning. And so I think that having access to as much language as possible, and I think it helps you write your own stories to yourself about your life. I mean, that's how we encode our own memories, right? But it also helps you receive story from others, whether it's written or spoken. And I think that being able to appreciate why something is beautiful, or when something is complex, or like one word choice over another, there's lots of words in English that can mean good, but like there's a difference between amazing, excellent, that's optimal, oh, wonderful. These things all have a different tone. Definitely. And I think that that's something that maybe AI will surprise me one day, right? But knowing the difference between even something like, oh, bless your heart, and oh, bless your heart, like those tonal differences that come from really knowing a language and really using it to communicate as opposed to as a blunt force object to translate. I think it changes the vibe enough that it's worth spending time in other languages as much as you can.
Yeah, as a fellow language lover, I mean, I fully agree. Yeah, everyone should learn languages.
Yes, and everybody should play games about them. So where can we find you online?
Oh, beautiful segue. We're at thornygames.com. And usually I think we pick and choose social media places to be, but right now we're on Instagram.
Excellent. I will put all that in the show notes, by the way, everyone. As y'all know, I can be found anywhere as Beyond Solitaire online. So come and hit me up. But Kathryn, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been so wonderful to have you.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody out there, like, subscribe, comment, leave questions, and most of all, happy gaming.